One of the most overlooked aspects of health is the emotional, mental, and spiritual side of things. You could be doing everything right with your nutrition, your sleep, your exercise. You could be doing the cold plunges in the sauna and getting all the sun, but you still might be suffering from some sort of health condition. You might not be achieving the goals that you want to achieve, and you might not be healing to your fullest capacity. Well, addressing that mental, emotional, and spiritual pillar of health might just be that thing that you need to take you to the next level and fully heal altogether. And that's exactly what my guest talks about in today's episode. I had the pleasure of interviewing Laurel Dewey, where she shares so many insights, her own personal story, and the insights that she shares in this episode are truly profound. You are going to want to take all the notes. And then about halfway through this episode, we flip scripts. She interviews me about the power of beef organs, her crazy experience with beef organs and how it's truly helped her in her life, and so much more. So a little bit about Laurel Dewey before we jump in. In her 30s, Laurel left the entertainment industry in Los Angeles to move to a small town in Colorado and quickly cultivated a successful freelance career writing hundreds of magazine articles. This led to an international column called The Humorous Herbalist that ran for 11 years. The column spawned 2 best-selling books on herbal medicine and 6 years of traveling the country teaching hands-on, natural healing workshops and lecturing to hundreds of people on the value of good nutrition and supportive plant medicine. Previously this year, Laurel launched her new podcast, The Alchemy of Natural Healing, which focuses on the deep healing work of body, mind, and spirit. So without further hesitation, I'm excited to introduce you to Laurel Dewey.
I was born in Los Angeles, and I came from a family who was deeply entrenched in holistic medicine. And my mother was a naturopathic doctor. My grandmother was a psychiatrist, but she never used drugs in her practice. She was very much into homeopathics, mind-body. I learned about the mind-body way back before Louise Hay ever wrote her book, or her groundbreaking book. And I was raised in a family where I didn't even have aspirin. I don't think I took my first dose of aspirin until I was in my mid-20s. And I didn't have my first antibiotic until I was 28, 29. So really intense, really herb-centered, organ-centered. My mother had a book, many books in her home office library. One of them was Dr. Price's book, Weston A. Price's book on the body and how native populations changed over time when they were introduced white sugar and white flour. But I remember looking at those photos when I was a kid and being so, just entranced by how nutrition really does change and how adding negative, white sugar, white flour into your diet really creates an imbalance. I also, by the time I was, I think, 9 years old, I was learning how to dowse. My mom and my grandmother was a dowser. My uncle was a dowser, a water dowser. He also dowsed. He was a water witcher. So I was taught how to dowse at the age of 9. And my grandmother would hide her wedding ring. She taught me how to visualize, and she would say, look at the ring, visualize what it looks like, and then she'd hide it in under a pillow, and I'd come in with a little dowser bobber, and I would find it. So I learned at a very young age how to visualize, how to conceptualize things, I was making herbal tinctures when I was a young kid. I was very much out in the wild gathering herbs, and even though we lived in Los Angeles, we eventually moved somewhere else. And then I moved to Colorado when I was 32. Really wanted to get out of Los Angeles and create a life that was more in keeping with how I was feeling. Even though I was a city girl, I really always felt like I wasn't. I always had this more country, bucolic vibe that I wanted to experience. So I came to Colorado and never looked back, never went back to Los Angeles. Have been here ever since. Started in 1996, or actually in 1994, I started a column, which became all over the United States, called The Humorous Herbalist. So I wrote a column, and it was about 11 years I did that. That spawned a couple books on plant medicine. And after that, I did write some novels and other books. I always wanted to be a writer, and ever since I was 6 years old. And I always wanted to be also involved in some way with alternative medicine. I didn't know exactly how, so the column I wrote for 11 years really did push me into that place. And I was doing just great. My life was going along perfectly. And then in roughly 2014 and then moving into 2016, the apple cart started to fall apart because of stress, long-term stress. And even though I was doing all the things I was supposed to be doing, I had an organic diet, I did supplements, I did, yoga and everything else. The stress from life and things that I hadn't really looked at closely because I was always going, finally caught up with me. So I had a 7-year journey, which is what my podcast is actually about, The Alchemy of Natural Healing. And the show is really about how you can be doing everything right. But if you haven't addressed your mind and your emotions and your spiritual life, it's all entangled within the physical. You can work on the physical all day long, but if your mind and your body are not all firing on all cylinders, so to speak, you're going to have some problems. And so my show is about alchemical transformation. And what that means simply is the deconstruction of an individual who decides to take that path and really move into their own self actualization, I guess you would call it, and become whatever their potential is. They want to really learn about that potential. And so my show navigates and guides people on that journey. It's a show, as I say to my listeners, I intentionally created a show that I wish I could have listened to myself when I was dark in the hole of my own self undoing and the deconstruction of who I was and where I was going. I'm pretty abrupt at times. People say that I don't have a whole lot of censor in me, and I don't. I kind of call it like I see it because this work is intense and you can't color it with like rainbows and lollipops and make it all sound romantic because it's not romantic work. It's the hardest work you're ever going to do.
That's when I hear that, that is absolutely inspiring. Because when I grew up, for you to be exposed to, your mom having these books in her library at such a young age, and you were being exposed to healthy living, that's truly remarkable. I grew up, eating a lot of fast food and not being exposed to these sort of environments. And so that's actually incredible. But at some point, in your 30s or so, you were stricken with all this chronic stress.
Oh,
And
that's so nice. It's nice you think I'm that young. No, actually, it happened when in my 50s, actually.
oh, wow.
I started really noticing something wasn't right. 53. And I've noticed, and I mentioned this on my show a lot, that I noticed that a lot of times women, when they do have that come to Jesus moment, it happens around between 52 and 54. Because I just pay attention. I've always paid attention all my life to what types of patterns happen in people's lives when they have problems happen. And mine happened right around 52, 54. And started wondering, who am I? And is this the life I want to be living? And I was a writer and I was doing all right. And I wrote some books. It wasn't satisfying me the way it used to satisfy me. And so that was the beginning of my awakening. And it continued for, that was 10 years ago. So it's been a while. But it's taken it took a lot out of me. And I had to really rebuild myself because I would say 7 years ago, I was not in good shape. I had to take a lot of time off from work. I couldn't function. And that's actually because I'd always done organ supplements. I'd been around that. My mother was really big into that. This is going to sound probably kind of gross, but when my mom, she wanted me to have the edge at school. And so about once every couple weeks, she would serve me this plate of brains, which I didn't know it was brains. I just saw a plate of this thing, and she would give it to me at breakfast. This is probably going to really gross your people out, your listeners out. But anyway, I would eat this plate of brains because she thought it was really, really good for myself. But she'd also feed me liver and desiccated thyroid and all that. And so I had that. I was around the organ meats a lot of my time. So when I started having the real degeneration that I was feeling, mind, body, spirit, And that started in 20, really heavy core in 2016, 2017. I was not worth much. Around 2018, I started, I think I found your company, I think it was around
Hmm.
2019. I'm not sure. But anyway, the point is I started out with your beef organ supplement. And then I quickly moved on to your liver. And then about, I think it was like a couple months later, I started your thyroid. And the collagen. And it does take a while, but I noticed that my hair got stronger, my skin got looking better, my nails got stronger, my hair finally was growing. It wasn't falling out from all the stress. And so I really depended on it. And I love supplements because I know a lot. My mom used to take me to the health conferences in Los Angeles back in the day, back in the 70s. And I learned all about, what's out there as a supplement manufacturers. And my mom knew a lot of the manufacturers. So I learned that there was a lot of fillers even back then, and they weren't pure, and so many were synthetic. So I'm always looking for something that was pure, worked, hardcore, and had the ability to really show me after, say, a month to 6 weeks that it really was working. So your supplements definitely were part of my regeneration process once I was on the road and had done all the work on the mind body. And then I had to start rebuilding my body. So I definitely was using ancestral supplements, and I still do, of course, to this day.
Right. No, and that you mentioned eating these organs as a kid, and is something that might sound gross to Americans, here in standard America, eating these foods today. But these are foods that we've eaten. Of course, Dr. Weston A. Price's work and the work of George V. Mann, Visiting the Messiah. All cultures have eaten these foods for millennia, and there's good reason that they did. I mean, one, they were a source of energy and calories, and nature, food isn't always accessible like it is today. And these foods, these organs, you were eating them. You said your mom wanted to give you the edge because these foods contain specific nutrients that you're not going to find in really anywhere else. And so that's why Ancestral Supplements was born, because people aren't eating these foods anymore. They fell out of style. And so we wanted to kind of make an easier bridge for people to get these nutrients so that way they can experience, because you were going through a lot of stress, and we know stress depletes the body of so many nutrients, which is why your hair was falling out and probably a host of other health issues that many people are experiencing. And when you can get these nutrients back into your diet through, whole foods preferably, but in desiccated organ supplementations, which is cold freeze-dried organ supplements, so most of the nutrition stays intact, you're able to get these nutrients
Yes.
into your body that we're otherwise not getting. So the fact that you are getting these in whole food form as a kid is you're in the 99th percentile of Americans that weren't doing that or aren't doing that.
Yeah, I don't think a whole lot. I don't think you could really sell the giving your kid a plate of brains today. I don't think that would go over
Mm,
well. But
no.
back when I was doing it, I didn't even know what it was. But I remember my aunt. I remember she later told me years later. She said I had to get up. I couldn't like watch you eat those, but I didn't know what they were. So my mom just said this will make you smart, and so I ate it. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think you can sell that to the American to the American family.
No.
But absolutely, a capsule is one thing, but a plate of brains, I don't think so.
Right, right. I mean, we're so distantly removed from kind of what humans have always done, whether that is nutrition or just nature or plant medicines, and big pharma kind of taking the role there. And, if we go back just a few generations of how things were, I mean, you didn't have most of the chronic disease that we had, but we also didn't have most of the ultra processed foods that we have. We didn't have the sedentary culture.
We didn't have the high fructose. We also didn't have the high fructose corn syrup.
Not at all. No, I mean, most.
Yeah, I mean, you look at pictures, you look at photographs of Woodstock, which I think is really cool to look at. Try to find a fat person in the crowd. Try to find a fat person in any pictures of beaches in the 1960s, the 1970s. But the minute they introduced high fructose corn syrup, and I remember McDonald's didn't even have to, it wasn't actually that bad in the beginning. It wasn't full of processing, and then it became more processed. But I didn't have my first McDonald's until I think I can't really remember, to be honest. I think my dad snuck me away and got me a McDonald's when I was like 15.
Wow.
And I thought the fries were the best thing I've ever had in my life.
That's amazing. I love that. And it's funny you mentioned Woodstock, or you go back and look at old photos and you won't find any overweight or obesity then. And I think it's funny because
Right.
in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, gyms were rare. You didn't have Planet Fitness. You didn't have gyms on every street corner or in every city. People didn't really have running shoes, I'd imagine, back then as much as we do today. People,
No, you're right.
so what people are exercising more than, I mean, we have a sedentary culture, but we have more gyms now than ever, and people are utilizing them. But we are continue to get more obese and sick. So what's going on here? And it has to do a large part with the ultra processed food consumption that we're eating, and the stress load, and just all of it together. And it's kind of crazy to think about.
I one of the things I do talk about on my show is that the idea of being productive. I mean, because that's what really got me so sick is this I need. I mean, I was like that since I was a child, but I was also really trained to be productive and to make sure that I got as much shoved into a day as I could. A lot was expected of me growing up, and I was under the belief system, which I talk a lot about on my show, is belief systems, that in order to be seen as good or seen as worthy, you had to be productive. And that productivity is what begins the stress response, where you start to make your list, but you never finish your list. And then when you look at your list at the end of the day, you start to say, oh man, I didn't do this, this, and this. So it creates this pattern of, I'm not enough, I can't do enough. And that pattern in the head is what starts to create those mindsets that eventually lead to sickness. It's going to happen over a period of years. It can happen over a period of 20, 25 years. Because most of the people, like on my show, but there's this idea that at a point in your life, you aren't willing to do it, say in your 30s or your 40s, because you have a family, a job, and life happens, and you're not really willing to just sit back and focus on yourself because number one, you never thought you had the time or you were even that important to focus on. But then then you get sick, and that's all out the window because you have to focus on yourself, and if you don't, you're not going to be able to be there for anyone. And that's a lot. That's a theme in my show that I talk about a lot is look at the idea of how you believe you have to be productive, how the productivity leads to stress. And so all these stressors that you put on yourself, they really aren't there, but society tends to put on you. So it's all about taking a step back, looking at your life from a point of view, and that typically happens in your late 40s and early 50s when typically illness
Hmm.
strikes. Because let's face it, you're not really going to stop your life and get off the roller coaster if you're okay or if you think you're okay. And if you aren't feeling okay, you might take a pill, you might take a little extra herb, you might do whatever you're doing supplement wise, but eventually the train's going to crash and then you're going to have to work on it. And that's kind of what happens when you're about it doesn't happen in your 30s because you're invincible in
Hmm.
your 30s and you're somewhat invincible in your 40s. That's why I think the transformation movement I see personally of people between 49 to 65. And I know people in their 80s who come to this movement who want to do transformative stuff in their 80s and all power to them.
They say the best time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining, and people don't want to do that.
I like that.
People don't want to do that. They
No,
wait
no.
until illness strikes, or they have a headache to take a
Right.
pill for whatever their illness is. And it's a little backwards. We need to start taking preventative measures. And if you're doing the right things, aka eating healthy food and getting sunshine and moving your body, you'll prevent a lot of these illnesses from occurring, and you just be a lot better off. So that's perfectly put what you were saying.
Well, when you said about the roof, about people don't want to fix the roof when the sun is shining because they want to go out in the sun
Hmm.
and they want to enjoy the sun. I agree. I think it's a good analogy because people have said to me many times, why didn't you stop? Why you knew all this stuff, you had all this background, you knew you were running yourself into the ground. But that's where the mental side comes in. That's when you have to really address your belief systems, your patterns of behavior that you grew up with,
Hmm.
how you see yourself as valued. Like, are you valued for what you can do, for what you can achieve? how many people are valued for just, people love to talk about, oh, I love you for just being you, but come on, the reality is people want to see something. People need some kind of intrinsic value in you. And if you're geared to participate in that dance, like I was, then it's going to run you down because you're never going to put yourself first until you have to put yourself first.
And do you feel that is more prevalent in today's society, the need to be productive, the need, we compare ourselves on social media, and we see how much productivity other people are doing, and then we look at ourselves, and you mentioned our to-do list, and we might not have accomplished anything, and then we label ourselves as quote unquote a failure, or we see ourselves as not good enough.
Right.
Is that more prevalent today, do you think, in the past 20, 30 years than it was, in our parents, grandparents' generation?
Well, I think social media definitely. I think on social media it gives you that thing where you want to present yourself as whatever you want to present yourself to the world as. And so if you want to present yourself as someone who's got an adventurous life, someone who's on the go all the time, doing exciting things and making other people feel, like almost jealous of how great you are and all that, that presents, because a lot of those people who do that, that's really not what they're doing in their life. A lot of their lives are not what you see that they're presenting out to the public. So it's a disservice. I think that there's a romanticism that people have. They show a lot of people traveling, having a wonderful time. But what's their spiritual side? Where are they coming from? There's got to be more to life. I mean, that's what people normally say at around 49, 50. They're like, well, is this all there is? Have I got this going on? Now, as far as today's society, you also have drugs. And so you have people who look like they're really capable, but what's fueling that capability? Is it Adderall? Is it whatever they're on? I don't know
Caffeine.
what they could be on.
Yeah.
Caffeine, sure. I mean, but I'm talking about,
That,
I know a lot of women who I've talked to who brag about how much they can get done in a day as if it's some sort of a badge. And I look at them and I say, okay, so you got up at 6 and you achieved all this and you're going to bed at midnight, but they're taking Adderall. And it's not done from an organic, natural place of being because nobody should be going 16 hours a day. And what I've often talked about on my show is I never put my feet up. I never stopped. I never like just went outside and drank a cup. If I was drinking a cup of coffee, it was at my desk and I was doing my work. Now, every single day, without exception, I always make a point to spend 20, 30 minutes outside, no phone, no computer, just being, just sitting and enjoying the gorgeous view we have here. And it's that time where you reconnect and you talk about what people used to do. People used to do that all the time. They used to sit on porches. They used to sit on the back porch, or they used to sit on the grass, or they would just sit around. People, before they had a phone to stare at or a computer or social media to update, they sat around, they talked. And I miss that. I really miss that. I miss that connection. And I think part of what is missing in today's society is that connection. But I've had to say goodbye to a lot of friends, old friends, and acquaintances that I don't connect to anymore because they're so into the social media. They're so into not being present, not having that grounded quality that people 30 and 40 and 50 years ago and beyond had. I think what you're talking about when you mention what it was like in the Woodstock years, people sat down and talked to each other. And it wasn't through email, it wasn't through Zoom, it was in front of each other. And there was a sense of, I don't want to use the word community because that's another buzzword that I think is overused. It was just people sitting in the backyard or the front porch talking. And you can't overlook how important that is because there was always, do you notice in the past, or maybe, I don't know if you do, but I remember people talked slower. That's the one thing I remember. One of the things I notice now is that people talk really fast and they expect you to kind of respond quickly. There's not a lot of breaks in conversations now. There's not a lot of moments of reflection. There is no reflection because everybody's busy. And if you don't have a time to reflect in your life, how do you know where you are? How do you know how do you check in with yourself or reflect on what a friend just said or what anyone just said to you and think about it? Because if you listen to conversations, as I'm a big, I observe a lot and I listen as a writer. I was always listening to conversations so I could understand the pattern of conversation and so I could write it. And I listen to conversations now, and there's not a lot of connection. Like people will say something, but they don't hear it. And then they just say something else that has nothing to do with the conversation. So unfortunately, we've lost connection and we've lost that. And because of that, we've lost the connection with ourselves, with our world, with everything else. And that's obviously not going to work because eventually you're going to do what I did and say, what am I doing? What is this all about? Is this what the rest of my life is going to be about? But you start to ask the big questions.
You mentioned, you take time, 20 minutes or so, to go outside and sit on the porch and stare into nature without your phone, no distractions. And that's all we ever had before. We didn't have technology like we have it today with cell phones and computers. I think sometimes people are afraid to be alone with their thoughts, or they just don't want to be bored.
Yes.
And so then they get on social
Yes.
media and
Very true.
they start seeing, all the comparing, where it's really just a
Yeah.
highlight reel. And you mentioned people are going 16 hours a
Yeah.
day. You might see people that are very productive on social media, and you don't see the behind the scenes of them actually taking Adderall or their crash, or how much they may or may not be struggling behind the scenes. And then it makes you feel inferior, like you're not getting enough done. And it's a vicious
Exactly.
cycle that we don't want to get into. So my question to you is, if somebody is living in a city where maybe they don't have access to nature, and they are doing this, because I've found myself doing this, where I get on social media and I'll compare, or I'll see that. What can somebody do if they just, want to try and get away? They want to free their mind a little bit. They want to de-stress, but they live in a city where maybe they don't have access to nature. What are, a few simple things that they could do to start doing this a little bit more?
Well, I mean, meditation, obviously. I mean, I would obviously start within the self. You talk about people who don't want to be alone. It's an interesting concept because people are terrified of being alone, but there's a lot of loneliness. You have to admit that there's a lot of loneliness in this world right now, and yet nobody wants to be alone. So I'm trying to figure that one out. I guess my first answer would be learn how to meditate, learn how to get in touch with that inner part of you. I couldn't meditate. Even though I was around it all my life, and my mom would take me to these little meditation groups as a child, my mind was racing too much. And it took me until I had to sit down when I had no ability to really do much except just focus on my health. The first 6, 7 months of my health process where my crisis happened, I was forced to sit in a rocking chair because it was the only chair that I could be comfortable in because I had a lot of physical problems that were creeping up from old accidents I didn't take care of. So I had no choice but to sit there and stare out a 3 by 3 window and really think about my thoughts. And it terrified me at first. But then I began to understand, wait a second, I kind of need to sit in this chair. I kind of need to just be, because I was never allowed to be, just be. What are you doing? What are you achieving? And so there I was spending these months sitting. I wasn't sitting in the chair for months. I mean, obviously I got up, but I was sitting there a lot and just contemplating my life. And that's how I learned. Once I got my mind to slow down, because I had to get my mind to slow down, that's when I actually learned how to meditate. And now I can put myself into a meditative state within probably 10 seconds if I have to. And I can do it in a crowded anywhere. I can do it in at home quietly, or I can do it in the middle of a market if I have to. So you train yourself. So answer to question is get more in touch with your own self. Learn how to regulate your nervous system. Learn how to quiet that inner voice. Learn how to quiet that chatter in your head that is obviously telling you things that are not true about yourself. You're being lied to by your own head, You're being lied to by what you see on social media, television, whatever, advertisements. So sit, learn how to meditate, learn how to do box breathing. Box breathing is something I learned, which is inhale, hold, and then exhale. It's 4 beats of 4, and it's a box. And that really helped me. Because I lived in the city, but it's been a while. I can't say, it depends where you live in the city, but I would say just turn your home, or maybe a room in your home, into a sanctuary, maybe a corner of your bedroom or something, where you can go to that place and you can become calm, and maybe light a candle and create an inner peace within you. Then you can take that peace out into the world. Because you can't really, let's face it, if you're living in an inner city, you got to be on kind of alert when you go out in the world. You can't just be floating around. So I think it's make that interconnection with yourself, dive in, learn how to regulate the nervous system. I had a whole show on my podcast called Slow Your Roll. Because if you don't, that's one of the fundamentals of healing, is you must slow your nervous system, and you have to learn how to do that through intentional breathing, through meditation, and through understanding what's important and what really isn't important in your life.
Right. Yeah, that's perfect. That is great. I love to hear that so much.
What's up, guys? Real quick, the first thing that I have is Ancestral Minerals. This is basically electrolytes that can help to replenish your body. You know, you're drinking a lot of liquids, you might be flushing a lot of things out. This is going to help keep you hydrated, because you need electrolytes like magnesium, potassium, chloride, sodium, wildflower bee pollen, and Atlantic kelp. This is going to help you to actually hydrate your cells, because it's not actually the water that's hydrating, it's the electrolytes. And that's what Ancestral Minerals are, all in the most bioavailable forms from the most pristine sources. So check that out. I'm also taking this grass-fed colostrum in powdered form from Ancestral Supplements, because colostrum is incredible at helping the gut. And right now I'm in a fasting protocol. I have everything cleared out of my digestive tract. I'm just doing juices, bone broth, water, electrolytes. That's it. And so when I can ingest a little bit of colostrum, it's kind of like a nice cheat code. There's very minimal, if any, calories in these little packets, and your gut is getting flooded with some nutrients in colostrum that are unique to colostrum alone, that can help to repair the gut lining, help leaky gut, help your immune system, and so many more things. So if you're looking to take your fasting protocol to the next level, give Ancestral Minerals and grass-fed colostrum a try today.
So you mentioned you have your podcast that you started. When did you start your podcast?
I actually launched it in February of this year.
February of this year. And you put out a variety of episodes, and it's all about mind, body, and spirit. You mentioned your health issues that you really struggle with, a few years ago or so, 7 or 8 years ago, was it?
Yeah, about 8 years ago.
8 years ago. Is that one of the catalysts?
Well, I never thought I was going to. I never thought I was going to do a podcast. When I was just trying to learn how to be a human being again, when I was so sick. And I remember thinking a lot of my times when I was lying in bed, because I had complete adrenal burnout. I flatlined. My adrenals were flatlined for 3 solid years. And I remember my doctor saying, I don't even know how you got out of bed to come to the appointment. And that's how bad I was. That's really what got my attention, because it took a long time. And I remember I'd had adrenal burnout when I was 17. I had it again when I was in my late 20s. And I had it again in my late 30s. And I remember a doctor saying to me, you can't keep doing this. You can't keep burning out. So the podcast really came about after I'd healed, and I started to realize that I think I had a voice that wasn't out there in the world right now. The voice I had was not someone who was talking about this from a theoretical point of view, but someone who had really been sick, and someone who had really then taken that and built themselves back up, mind, body, and spirit, and what it took to do that. And I spent 18 months prepping for my show, because I really wasn't sure how my voice was going to be accepted out there in this cancel culture. That's one of the things I was really concerned about. I was concerned that my message, which is, it's very to the point, and that's one of the things a lot of my listeners say, it's like, you're really, like, you don't mince words. I can be very abrupt. I have a lot of compassion, though. I'm not like someone who doesn't have compassion. I have more than enough compassion for what people are going through, because I went through it myself. But I also understand that there's a point where you can't enable people by just throwing a lot of compassion at them. You have to get them to wake up. And once they wake up, they can hopefully start to see where they're getting in their own way. That's the start. And so my podcast, I like to think, is a navigational tool for people who are going through this right now. It's a show that I wish I could have listened to on myself when I was going through it. I intentionally created a show that I wished in my darkest days I could have turned on and had an understanding of that what I was going through was not, I wasn't the only one in the world going through it. Because it's a very lonely place to be when your body and your mind and your spirit fall apart and you really feel isolated. You talk about this is a lonely world. It's a really lonely world when you are not doing well physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, because you start to notice who your friends are, and you notice how far they scatter when things get real, and you become kind of a buzzkill. I think the show really came from, I did a lot of writing when I was sick. I wrote myself a lot of emails. I would just sometimes get up at 2 a.m. and just type my feelings out. And a lot of the show is based on probably 500 pages of things I wrote when I was going through my years of problems. And I spent 18 months going over these things I wrote. Most of it was just garbage, so I, got rid of it. But most of it, there were some things in there that I thought were really valuable that other people would benefit from. It's not a show. My show is not just me talking about my own problems. It's about, here's what happens, here's the pattern that is attached to that problem, and here's how I took care of it, and here's how I've seen other people take care of it. It's all based on real world experience. For a brief period of time, I did a lot of nutritional counseling. I was a writer, I wrote books, but at the same side, I also did nutritional counseling. And while I was doing that, I really recognized not so much the pattern, the patterns of physical imbalance were obviously there, but the patterns of emotional and there wasn't a lot of emotional coherence. There wasn't a lot of heart coherence. There wasn't a lot of mental ability to address your problems and face your problems. And those were the reasons people were sick. My show takes that whole stew and puts it together and says, you have to strengthen your body, but you also have to strengthen your mind and your spirit and your emotional body. And through what I went through, I think I have I know I have a really good baseline for understanding this. And one of the things I think is important is that once you go through this and you really heal your unhealed self, you can see the unhealed nature in other people when you meet them. You can see that they're not necessarily all there. You can see they're not present. They're either on the road all the time or they're moving all the time and they can't stop moving. But you can also see a part of them that wants to connect and they can't connect because of something in their mind and their body that is preventing that. I also spend a lot of time, 30, 40 years now, really looking at this connection, this mind-body connection. And I paid attention to when someone has a specific type of illness, what is the correlating mental and emotional side of that illness? And I find that absolutely fascinating. It's interesting because when you start to talk about mind-body medicine, because this has happened to me before, people think you're judging them. That's interesting. They immediately say, well, you're judging me. And I'll say, well, you have this issue. I had gastritis when I was 12 years old. Okay. Even though I was on a really good diet, I had gastritis. Now, someone should have looked at me and said, why does this 12-year-old have gastritis? Well, it had to do with a lot of stress, a lot of worry, because a lot was expected of me growing up, good grades, do the right thing. A lot of pressure was put on me. Well, that's an inflammation. So that's anger. I had no voice. I had no ability to say, hey, look at me, I need help, I need a break, I can't keep doing this stress that I'm under. But no one did that. They treated it with natural medicine. I think I got marshmallow tea, and I got a lot of mucilaginous herbs and things like that, which calmed the gastritis. But the mental side and the emotional side was never addressed. That's really what my show is about, is I understand this, and I understand that people who have all these different types of maladies, illnesses, whatever you want to call it, and if you put the word chronic, for example, in front of any disease, all that means to me is it's a not just a chronic physical problem, but it's a chronic mental and emotional pattern as well. So someone says, well, I have chronic digestive problems, and I've done everything, probiotics, prebiotics, I've done everything I know how to do, but I'm still not there. Then you look at the emotional and the mental side of it. Once you bring all those three together, then you have this opportunity where you can truly, truly heal.
Yeah, that it needs to be like that. I think a lot of people forget that as well, and they're trying to treat the symptoms through
Right.
physical methods, whether that is food, and which absolutely plays a role. But if you're not addressing the mind, the mental and emotional and spiritual connections as well, then the symptoms might lie dormant for a little bit, but it may come back, present itself in other ways, manifestations. So I'm sure, people absolutely need to hear your message. So we'll link, your podcast in the show notes below, in the description below, so people can check that out. You have you have a beautiful voice that needs to be heard by the masses, and it's truly remarkable. It's a beautiful message that you're sharing. All right, Laurel. Well, it was great hearing about your story and everything that you have to offer on your podcast. But now, since this is a two-parter, we're going to flip the script a little bit, and now you're going to ask me the questions, and you can take it from here.
I'd like to know when you began your health journey and what instigated that health journey.
Yeah. So, I kind of mentioned it briefly earlier in the show, but I grew up not living the healthiest lifestyle as a kid, a bunch of fast food. I grew up in a household raised by my grandparents. They were smokers inside the house. Very loving grandparents, did everything for me. My parents were 15, 16 years old when I was born, so I was primarily raised by my mom's parents. But again, it wasn't the healthiest living environment. So I was always sick with not only colds and flus, but I had bleeding ear infections as a child. I missed a ton of elementary school. And it wasn't really until I moved in with my dad when I was 12 that I started to get better, because he didn't smoke inside the house. It was a little bit healthier of a living environment. Still standard America food, all the sugar, seed oils, ultra processed foods. But I was also an avid athlete growing up. I played virtually every sport under the sun. So I was very active, but just would get sick often. But really what led me into the health and wellness space was, since I had a love for sports, I ended up playing college sports at Penn State, a swimmer and a baseball player. And I loved nutrition. I loved how nutrition impacted my performance in sports, and I loved just kind of the association of how nutrition impacted the body. So I ended up becoming a nutrition major there, which we could talk about why that the curriculum in most college educations is a little bit off base when it comes to, optimal health.
Or non-existent.
Exactly. Yeah.
Non-existent.
And I learned that very early on. I learned that my sophomore year when I started doing outside research, podcasts and books. And so I was really torn kind of going throughout most of my college career. And that's really kind of where I fell in love with health. But my sophomore year is also the pivotal moment for me, is really what solidified why I wanted to do what I do today. And that was when my uncle passed away. He was 43 years young. He wasn't that old, 43, and he outwardly he was healthy. He wasn't severely overweight, maybe a touch overweight, but very active, very healthy looking guy. And he just went to bed one night and didn't wake up. And he had a massive heart attack in his sleep. And so that was, sent a shockwave to me and our entire family, because he was like a second dad to me. And so that kind of set me on a path of, okay, I want to learn about heart disease. I want to learn about nutrition. I want to learn about stress, all components that go into health. And so that was February of 2015. So a little over 9 years ago. And since then, I've really kind of made it my life's mission to learn as much about health and try and pay that forward as much as I can. And so that's really what I've been trying to do, and ultimately what's led me to Ancestral Supplements and doing what I do here.
How long did it take you to realize once you started on a better nutritional path? How many years did it take? Because I know it takes years. Many years did it take you before you really started to see quantified difference in the way you looked and the way you felt?
It's funny because when I found a nutrition class in college, I was following, the My Plate method, which was grains and all that sort of stuff. And I was a college athlete, but I was still inflamed looking. I just was a little bit fluffy. I just wasn't the healthiest. And, being a college athlete, I really didn't have the ability to go out and do the whole party scene. I was very busy with 2 college sports, trying to maintain my grades. So it was really just shifting my diet around. So once I shifted from not eating the dietary guidelines approach and really shifting more into a holistic approach, doing a different nutrition approach, but also combined with getting some sun and stress levels, doing all these other things, I noticed it within a semester's time. So we're talking about 4 or 5 months time. Wow. I really kind of changed not only my outlook, but I could see the inflammation go down. I could see just my performance in my athletic endeavors go up. My mood changed as well. Mm-hmm. But of course, exactly. It's an evolution, and I'm constantly learning things over time. Some things might have taken a couple years to change. Other things maybe a few months. So it's an evolution. But when I changed my lifestyle, it took a few months for me to really notice, hey, this is worth pursuing.
When did you get into organ supplements?
So 2016, early 2017, I grew up, my dad has always been an avid gardener and hunter, very in tune with nature. And I grew up exposed to that when I moved in with him when I was 12. I got to see him planting a garden. I would go hunting with him. And at that time in 2016, I started really, because in 2015 is when my uncle passed. So that whole year I was really diving into this space, learning more about plant medicines and also the power of different types of diets for, what have you. And that is when I went hunting and I shot a deer, and I didn't want to let any of that deer go to waste. So I utilized virtually every part of that deer. And my dog and I both ate the liver and the heart, and we shared that. And I realized hey, I need more of this, but I couldn't hunt anymore. So I went on Amazon, and I believe it was January of 2017, and I found Ancestral Supplements, and the reviews speak for themselves. And they were pretty early on in their infancy. I believe Ancestral Supplements was founded in 2016 or so. So I found them in 2017, and I started working for them in January of 2022. I actually reached out to them when I found them and asked if I could work for them, but they weren't hiring. They didn't have any employees at that point. And wow. That's when I first got interested in organ supplementation, but I didn't start working for the company until a few years ago.
So what are your favorite supplements? I mean, what is your go-to? I know what my go-tos are. My go-tos are absolutely thyroid. I wouldn't be without the thyroid. Adrenal, that one got me. I got a good story about the adrenal, by the way. And liver. And I love the collagen. What are your favorites?
Yeah. I definitely want to hear that adrenal story. But those are our adrenals in our top 5 most popular products. Thyroid is number 1. That and liver.
Thyroid is number 1? Thyroid is number 1?
Thyroid is number 1, maybe number 2. Liver is it's a toss up between that and liver. But they're very powerful, and the reviews, are incredible. People see impressive, very transformational, transformations. But my favorites, I kind of go back and forth depending on what I need most in my life. And if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I might have had a different favorite. But right now, I'm really loving the colostrum. I love all of its benefits. I've researched the history, the science. We've put out some good content on colostrum, and I really love that. So that's probably my number one favorite. But I also love the bovine tracheal cartilage just for its ability to help the skin, help joints, help tendons and ligaments. There's a lot of incredible science with Dr. Pruden back in the 1940s or 50s on bovine tracheal cartilage. It's kind of like a collagen, but it's ramped up, and you might have a little bit maybe different benefits, but it's just very powerful at helping wound healing and joint transformation. So those are probably my two favorites.
So like good after an accident, after you tear a muscle or tear tendons?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's the adrenal story that you have?
So I was at a conference in South Dakota in November of 2021. And the last night of the conference, there was a bunch of people partying that kept me awake all night long. And I had my bags packed, I'm ready to leave, and I've got a 17 or probably a 16-hour drive back from South Dakota to where I live in Colorado. So I was up all night because the people were making noise and they were partying, and I'm thinking, this is not going to go well because if I got a big drive ahead of me. So I had no sleep. And I wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, I don't wake up. I'm not saying I wake up. I got up out of bed, and I had been awake all night. And I had, like I said, this long drive, and it's starting to snow. Oh. And then it starts to do a whiteout. And I'm thinking, I can't just stay here. I have to leave. I have to get out of here. So I hesitatingly got into the car, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to take those adrenal supplements from Ancestral Supplements. I'm going to take a lot of them. So I took the bottle out of my suitcase and had it in the car next to me. And I had a water bottle, and I took 4 supplements. I think I took like 4 supplements when I got in the car, and I was freaking out because I thought, this is not a good thing. I'm probably not going to do well on this because I was already feeling sleepy. Of course I was. I'm driving and the snow's hitting me. So I pull over to the side of the road and I take 4 more supplements. I take 4 more of the adrenal supplements. So I had 8 in a period of probably 90 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And I would say that at probably 15 minutes after that, it was as if this shift just happened. I had a tremendous clarity, and while I was still feeling the edge of the fatigue, of course I had, because at that point I'd been up 24 hours, 25 hours straight. Mind you, I was in bed laying down, but I was awake when I was trying to sleep. But I've been awake, and I'm thinking, I can do this. After about 2 hours, I'm thinking, I can do this. And I kept encountering more bad weather, more icy roads and all that. So about 2 hours after that, I take 4 more of 4 more adrenals. So I think the next time I had like almost 12 inside of me in the space of a very short few hours. It was a clarity of fuel. It wasn't a caffeinated fuel. It was a focused fuel. But most importantly, it gave me this sense of, I can do this.
Yeah.
Yes, I have maybe 10 more hours of driving, but I can do this. And I think I took another 3 about 2 hours later. And then I thought I better stop or I'll never go back to sleep, or, I'll be so adrenally awake. But I got home, and it was so interesting because when I got home, at that time, I'd probably been up for 34 hours, 36 hours. And I thought I would just crash. And I actually stayed up. I got home and I was walking around for like 7 more hours and doing things and unpacking and thinking, is this real? Am I able to actually do this?
It's a very, very powerful product. 8 is a lot, which I don't recommend, but in circumstances that you were in, it sounded like it was a lifesaver.
I was in I know. I had to do something drastic, and I know that's not the supplement. I know that's not how many a person should take, but the example is that when you didn't have any sleep and you're dealing with icy roads, and it never stopped snowing the entire time. You know what it's like to drive when you've got snow pelting at you at your window, and roads were getting closed. I had to navigate different ways of getting back to Colorado. So, but my mind was clear, and I could make decisions, and I wasn't freaking out about the weather, and I wasn't concerned that it wasn't going to work. Everything just worked out.
You heard it here first, the adrenal supplement. I love that so much.
I think one of my favorite supplements you have is your thyroid. I've been on that now a year and a half,
Yeah.
and I have noticed because I was taking Armor Thyroid for a brief period of
Hmm.
time, and it didn't really feel right for me. So I started doing your thyroid about 18 months ago, and I've noticed that my hair's not falling out. I've noticed that I have certainly more energy and that my weight distribution is different, of course. I'm not getting that hypothyroid weight in the hips and upper hips and the stomach.
Yeah, thyroid is like I mentioned, it's our number one or number two bestseller, and
Oh, yeah.
we actually can't, or at least we haven't been able to get it on Amazon because it's considered it's that potent of a medication almost. And when we
Really?
yeah, it's that and Adrenal actually I don't believe are on Amazon. Every other product is on Amazon except for thyroid and Adrenal because it's considered quote unquote a medication, and that's speaks to the power that food has,
Yeah.
one, but also that's why we always, anytime customers reach out to our customer service, our tribe support is what we call them, we always work with them, health coaching, and always mention, hey, please keep working with your physician and don't just stop taking Armor Thyroid or whatever other thyroid medication you might be on, because this, if you read the reviews on our website, people have time and time again been able to replace their
Yes.
medication and
Right.
improve their symptoms just by taking this food, which is desiccated beef thyroid. And it just speaks to the power of food as medicine.
Yeah, and I really love that because there's so much synthetics out there, as you know, in the industry of
Hmm.
health, of herbal medicine and of supplements. I just remember going to all those health conferences as a young child and also then as a teenager, and then I've done them in the last 20 years. And the junk that is out there right now, passing for alternative medicine or passing for health and things that are actually going to help you is shockingly
Yeah.
awful. I really appreciate the fact that Ancestral Supplements. I remember when I first found your company and it reminded me, I loved your marketing. I love the whole thing about it. And I remember thinking to myself, this reminds me of the way I grew up.
Yeah.
And this reminds me of the simplistic, no additives. Here's what we're going to do. I mean, I remember in my day, people would take beef thyroid, and freeze it, and then cut it up, and then put it in little like meat or whatever, and then you take it down, or you put a little bit of something, you take it and eat it, and that was a way a lot of people got their thyroid
Hmm.
supplements back then. So I was really thrilled when I saw your company, and I saw the integrity and I saw the attention to what I thought was old school practices in a new school mentality, and love them.
Yeah.
Absolutely love them. And
That's what
I recommend your stuff to everybody I talk to.
I love that. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bridge the gap for people, and really, um, our tagline is we're trying to put back in what the modern world left out, because we're leaving out a lot of
I
these
like that.
organ supplements.
Yeah.
We're leaving out a lot of these organs and all this lifestyle that we had, 50, 60, 70 years ago. And that's really what we're trying to do. So I appreciate you saying
Yeah.
that.
No, I love it. I'm a huge supporter of your company. And like I said, I recommend it to a lot of people, and I've recommended it on my podcast. I tell people all the time, go check out the notes and check, this all, because it's that important to me that if you're going to regenerate your body and you're going to build yourself back up physically, it has to be done from the ground up, and it has to be done in that intrinsic way where your organs are supported and your blood is supported and your methylation is supported through the liver and all this and this is, if you can get that going, then you can address the mind body stuff. You can, if you have the groundwork of your physical body in place, then you can go, okay, now I can address the harder things, and they are harder. The mental and the emotional is a lot harder than tackling the body, because you have to experience and you have to process things that you don't necessarily want to
Right.
process.
Absolutely. And we try to do that at Ancestral Supplements as well. And, you mentioned about the purity and trying to do things the right way. And that's why we always are third party tested with our products. No preservatives, no additives, no fillers. We really just want to keep it as simple as nature intended. And, we're actually visiting one of our ranches here next month we're going to Tennessee to see where some of our products come from, certified regenerative and a lot of these practices that we believe are better for not only the environment, but our health and the animals as well. So we're going there to see, and hopefully we can get some good content and share with everybody. And I feel like we covered a lot of ground today. We got to learn a lot about you, and, I was able to answer some questions, but I feel like we're coming up on time. And
Okay.
I feel like, we covered a lot of ground. So again, I will list your podcast. Can you mention the name and where to find you and everything like that?
Sure. The podcast is The Alchemy of Natural Healing, and you can get it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I think it's on iHeartRadio, and you can get it at The Alchemy of Natural Healing, or just type in the Alchemy of Natural Healing. I also have a very robust Instagram page that I love. I have some great people there, and they leave great comments. I post a lot of inspirational quotes, and we talk, and I do sound bites from the show, and encourage people to find my Instagram page, which is The Alchemy of Natural Healing, or at Laurel Dewey.
Perfect. I love it. We will list all that in the description below. Laurel, thank you for joining me today. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.